everyone, my name is Yasel Torres. I'm a fourth-year environmental studies major at UC Santa Barbara. I am also the program coordinator for the Citizens Planning Association. We are a nonprofit grassroots organization that focus on countywide land use issues. We advocate for the best standards of design and natural resource protection in order to maintain sustainable communities and protect the heritage of Santa Barbara County. This event is our fourth of several in our community land use planning and a changing climate meetings to be held throughout the county. I'd like to thank the Women's Environmental Watch for being our co-sponsor for this event. And I'd also like to thank our moderator for this discussion, Garrett Wong. Garrett is the Climate Program Manager for the County of Santa Barbara. He is responsible for the county's 2015 Energy and Climate Action Plan and will lead the development of a 2030 Climate Action Plan to reduce countywide emissions 50% below 1990 levels. Previously, Garrett served as a Senior Sustainability Analyst for Climate and Energy for the City of Santa Monica, where he led policy projects and programs for climate, energy, and electric vehicles. I'll hand it over to Garrett.
Thank you, Yasel. Thank you, CPA, for the opportunity to be here, and thank you, WeWatch, also for being a part of the program. As Yasel mentioned, my name is Garrett Wong, and I'm the county's Climate Program Manager. And if you haven't heard of that, it's because it's a brand new role, and I've been here for about 6 months. I'm new to the area, as Yasel mentioned, hailing from the city of Santa Monica, and just recently relocated to Santa Barbara, where we've been really enjoying it so far, and I'm just getting to know the area, and so looking forward to meeting and discussing with all of you about all the challenges, but also all the resources that are here in the area. So before we get started with our esteemed panel, I'll give you an overview of what we're doing here at the county from a sustainability perspective, and then we'll have a much more in-depth conversation around what are the general climate challenges that this region faces, as well as what are the potential solutions that we can be working on collectively. So I'm part of the Sustainability Division, and we are a division of the Community Services Department. We are a mighty team of 6 plus 1 intern, and we're still growing. So I'm leading our climate program section, and we have a building, energy, and water section where we're leading energy efficiency programs. We have a strategic energy plan that seeks to increase renewable energy across the county. And we'll soon be working on other issues like energy assurance. So for times when there are wildfires or power safety shutoffs, looking at ways that we can help keep the lights on for people and keeping people safe and healthy when there's no power around. So Yasel mentioned our Energy and Climate Action Plan. We have one that dates back to 2015. It hasn't been as effective as we all would have liked, unfortunately. But the general idea of a climate action plan is to look at all the different sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the county. And primarily, we see that vehicle transportation, energy use in buildings, other sources such as agriculture and the waste that we throw away to the landfill are our primary sources of emissions. Next slide. I know it's hard to read, but between the first time in which we looked at our greenhouse gas emissions and the second time in which we looked at our greenhouse gas emissions, which is years 2007 and years 2016, countywide emissions have gone up by about 14%. And it's a variety of different factors. We've seen increases in people driving. We've seen increases in commercial activity. But on the flip side, there's also been some decreases. We've improved the way that we've handled our solid waste. We're recycling and composting more, and we'll be doing more of that into the future as we open the resource center at Tahiguas landfill. So there are some promising things in the near horizon that will help us get back on track. I'm going to briefly go over just a handful of things that are going on that you might hear about in the near future, and then we'll move on into our panel. So the first one is called Terra Count, and this is a grant-funded effort that our Sustainability Division is leading. And the idea is that we want to look at all the activity that happens over the county from a land use perspective. from agricultural uses, from natural lands to urban forms, and then look at the future. What might happen if certain agricultural uses became urban? What would happen if we did different agricultural practices to improve soil health or increase biomass? What would the carbon impact of all those different activities be over time? And so this innovative project will look at how we can basically assess and perhaps infuse more information and data into those kinds of decisions that we make in the future. The second, not yet. Sorry, I mentioned our new climate, or Ysel mentioned our new climate action plan, and so that's an effort that we'll be launching this year to work with the community, identify potential solutions for helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also increase community resiliency, as I mentioned. Other things you should know about are coming out of our planning and development department. They're working on a safety element update, and that will also include a vulnerability assessment to climate change. So we all know that wildfire and mudslides can be a particularly severe and fatal hazard to people, obviously, and climate change could affect that even more. Sea level rise, drought, extreme heat, extreme cold, vector-borne diseases, those are all potential hazards that could be further exacerbated by climate change. And we want to understand how people could be affected and made more vulnerable than they already are, and how we can make plans to ensure that people are kept more safe and healthy, and work on ways to build more stronger community resilience. Then there's the active transportation plan, and that's basically looking at how we get around, whether it's on our own vehicles, whether it's in public transportation or on foot or on bike or some other mode that we haven't even thought of yet. But we want to consider ways of making sure that people have choices to get around and they're not always bound to one mode only all the time. Next slide. The last thing I'd like to mention is what we call a regional climate collaborative. And yesterday we launched the Santa Barbara County Regional Climate Collaborative, and there's materials in the back for you to look at. It's a really exciting time. There's a lot of things going on in the county that we're all trying to grapple with and deal with, but we all know that no single jurisdiction, no single organization can deal with it by itself. And the solutions that we need to think of need to be regional in nature. And so this collaborative is meant to organize ourselves and to bring together people to the table who work on regional solutions to the regional problems that we face. So we invite you to learn more, and we invite you to consider joining as a member if you're part of an organization, and helping stay engaged in the conversation. So there's my contact, and I'm happy to have Morel distribute my contact information if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing, or just learning more from me directly. I'm happy to come back out and speak to any number of people on the range of things that we're working on and the range of concerns and suggestions that you might have. So with that, we're going to turn to our esteemed panel. We'll go one by one down the line, and everyone's going to have some prepared comments, and there'll be an opportunity for some burning follow-up questions. But generally, we're going to try and keep moving on down the line. And then at the end, we'll have an open conversation to talk about all the different interconnectedness and synergies between our work. First up, not immediately to your left, but second in, is Chief Hartwig, Mark Hartwig, from County Fire Department. And he was named chief in February of 2019. And before that, he was the fire chief in San Bernardino County, leading a department of 1,065 employees, 70 fire stations covering 10 incorporated cities and 60 unincorporated communities. So you have it pretty easy, I guess, nowadays. He was recognized as the 2017 California Fire Chief of the Year by the California State Fire Chiefs Association and appointed by then Governor Jerry Brown to the California Commission on Emergency Medical Services, which he continues to serve. We're very pleased to have him here and have him here tonight to speak to us. Mark.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Garrett. I get to, we brought our expert up, so I'm not the expert really on anything. It's my job to make sure that we get the experts together and work in the right direction. And I'm proud to lead such an accomplished group of people who are so committed to really serving the communities throughout Santa Barbara County. It's an exciting year. It's been a year for me, and it seems like about a week. I want to just highlight a couple things, and I'm going to bring up Robbie, our fire marshal, really our vegetation management expert within the county. The county fire department is actually a fire district. We live off of your property taxes. I get 17 cents out of your property tax dollars. A dollar goes to the fire district. We, as the county fire district, are responsible for about 2,500 of the 2,700 square miles. And we have two responsibilities. We cover the people and property within the national forest. We do all of the vegetation management and suppression, fire suppression for the state responsibility areas. And then we have our own fire district responsibility and boundaries, and we're responsible for the people and property and fire suppression in that. As a fire department, though, we do respond, and we have a great firefighting force and a lot of equipment to do that, but really preventing fire and minimizing the impacts of fire is really our primary concern, especially in Robbie's shop. He's a division chief and fire marshal for us at the county fire department. And really what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how we can do responsible fuels management. Now, unfortunately, in the field of fuels management, there isn't anything that we do that isn't controversial to somebody. In fact, I don't think I've been told fewer than 5 times by people throughout the county and pretty well-informed groups that whatever you do, do anything but don't use mechanized means. And then somebody else will come in and say, well, you can use mechanized means, but don't use goats or sheep. And then there's other people who come in and say, use goats, but don't use sheep because goats eat everything. And maybe one of the most controversial ways to do it is to use fire to fight fire. And when I say fight fire, I'm a zoology major. I don't know how I got into the fire service, but I graduated with a degree from Cal Poly in zoology, did a lot of science. And what I realized even before I got into the fire business is that if we burn responsibly, if we manage vegetation responsibly, that would be low intensity and more frequent burns, really trying to mimic what nature did before we came in and suppressed everything. So you're probably going to see a few more burning projects in the coming future, especially for a couple reasons. I think Robbie's going to talk about them, especially since the state has gone through and done a statewide environmental impact report. So instead of us having to do an environmental impact report on every single project that we do, the state went through, and in fact, I talked to the state director, the CAL FIRE director, who said it took him 6 years to get this through. Now, it's being challenged by some groups in court right now, but a monumental effort to get that through so that now we can go through and we can identify these projects and then put together plans that will responsibly put fire on the ground and burn off some areas. And then in some areas, of course, burning isn't the answer. In some areas, it's using hand crews and mechanized means. We're working together. I think Garrett said it well. There is no jurisdiction. The county fire department being the biggest one, we can't do it alone. And so we're working really well with our counterparts, our colleagues, our fire partners throughout the county to figure out how we can do it together in the same way so that when you go from Lompoc or Burton Mesa over to Carpinteria or Santa Maria or Orchid, you're not seeing different methods and outcomes. So I'm going to kick it over to Robbie. I'm going to be around here and stay around. I'm happy to talk with anybody afterwards. But Robbie, again, born and raised here. And if I have a question about the history, the fire history, or even a landmark in this county, I go to Robbie, and Robbie won't just tell me about it. He'll tell me a story for about 10 minutes on it. So he knows a lot about those areas. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Rob Hazard, the county fire marshal.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, everyone, for inviting us. We love doing presentations like this. It's our chance to kind of tell the story of what we do. A lot of times, what we do is just off in the back in areas that people don't know where we are and what we're doing, and it's always nice to come out and spread the word about prevention. And then Yesel, this is going to have little animations in it, so it's going to be a little tricky to go through it, but we'll manage. So again, when we're talking about climate change and what those impacts will be moving forward, because we can all agree that definitely the climate does seem to be changing. People debate what is responsible for it. But interestingly, wildland firefighting as a discipline and as a profession, we were noticing changes in fires at least 10 years ago, and we were talking about it. And when the debate would come up, for us, we felt like we were the canary in a coal mine, that like, obviously something's changing. The fires are burning differently. And my career, I'm at 31 years of wildland firefighting, and I've definitely noticed a change. I've fought fires in the same place that I did 20 years ago, but they're behaving very differently now. And so it does seem that climate change for us as a fire profession is impacting us in a big way. There's other impacts to our mission. There's impacts in public health, impacts for our firefighters. A hotter climate is more stressful to work in any kind of fire environment. But where we really see the biggest impact is in wildland fire. That's where we have significant history of fire that we can compare, like I said, across a generation of time and see these changes happening. A basic concept of wildland fire and why the weather and how the weather interacts with fire is so important is this basic fire behavior triangle that you see. And these are the three elements that come together that define how a fire burns, why it burns the way it does, why some fires are small and we're able to suppress, and other fires burn for days and days and days and take out thousands of acres and change the landscape. And so those three elements are weather, topography, and fuels. The weather being the most dynamic, most changeable, with the most impact on what your fire does. Topography also drives the fire in many different ways. Fire tends to burn uphill much faster, and it will follow changes in topography. And then the fuels, the vegetation, that's what's burning. Climate change has a major impact on weather conditions, and it also has a major impact on the state of the vegetation, because climate change is starting to cause more frequent droughts and less precipitation. All right. This map shows the very dynamic fire history of our county. So all of those colored polygons that you see all represent a historical fire. And the dark red ones are the fires that have happened in the last couple of years. And you can see down in the lower right corner of the map, that's the Thomas Fire as it came into Santa Barbara County from Ventura. But you can also see some other notable fires, particularly along the south coast. You've got the Sherpa Fire, the Whittier, the 2016 Ray Fire. Way out there in Vandenberg Air Force Base, the Canyon Fire that we had. Kind of up on the left-hand upper side of the screen is the Alamo Fire. Some folks probably remember that one that burned in the Tepesquet area. Probably the most notable fire for the San Ynez Valley, because you had a front row seat to it, would be the 2007 Zaca Fire, the very large, kind of pinkish, big, huge blob that you see on the screen there. And I'm sure, how many folks here remember the Zaca Fire and what? Yeah, okay, yeah, very significant impact to the valley, mainly because you could see it every single day burning across the San Rafael Mountains. So it was very dramatic. There were many evacuations for some of the communities, particularly Woodstock area, Happy Canyon. Some of those communities were evacuated. So it was very impactful. Next slide. So as I stated, climate change is definitely having an impact all across the world with the way wildfires are behaving. Frequency of fires, size of fires, and the severity of fires, how hot and intense they're burning. Next slide. And this just shows an example of just in California, since 1998 till 2018, the increase in acreage statewide. So this is statewide acreage, not individual fire acres, but statewide. So it really shows the cumulative effect year by year of our fire seasons. And so I started fighting fire in 1988, 10 years before the first little bar that you see there. And we were probably fairly consistent for that decade, the 1980s and through the 90s. Kind of a consistent number of fires per year and a consistent amount of acres per year. And I remember as a young firefighter that we would look to states like Alaska that would have these huge totals of acreage, because Alaska has these gigantic tundra fires that burn all summer long. We're now seeing acreages in the state of California that are exceeding how many acres are burning up in Alaska. So it's pretty dramatic, the change in fires and how large they're getting and how much cumulative acres we're seeing. Okay, next slide. This chart shows the percent area of California that's involved in drought, and so how that cyclical drought process works. And you can see that while we had a fairly significant drought in the early 2000s, we had another drought kind of towards the end of the first decade of the 2000s. You can see what happened from 2012 to 2017, very significant drought. And it wasn't, what was really remarkable about that period and that drought in particular was it was statewide. It covered the whole entire state. A lot of times, if Southern California is in drought, then Northern California is getting a lot of rain. But that 5-year drought was significant because it was statewide, covered everything. And you could see it reflected in the type of fire seasons we had, 2017, 2018, thinking about some very large fires that we had, the Carr Fire up in Redding, and then of course the Camp Fire that burned down the town of Paradise, and then our own local large fires that we've seen, the Thomas Fire and the Whittier Fire. Okay. So many actions are needed for us to become fire adapted as a community and as a county. Education is a huge part of the solution because a lot of the things that can help us become more resilient to fire are actions that homeowners can take. Field treatments are one part of the solution. They're not the whole solution, but they're an example of one thing that we can do sort of proactively, okay? And then land use planning. So I know that's near and dear to the CPA's heart is proper land use planning. And so we can do many things as we look to our community's future by doing proper land use planning, for example, to make sure that we plan our future housing developments in areas that perhaps are in less fire hazard prone parts of our county. So encouraging land use like agriculture, because we are finding that a viable agricultural greenbelt can be a huge protective factor for many of our communities. Okay, next slide. So we'll zip through this one. So the things that we can do in terms of wildfire risk reduction that we really focus on as an agency, it starts with fire prevention. If we can prevent fires from even starting, we're a huge leg up. So the more fires we can actually keep from starting, we can really reduce the impact to our community. Public education, as I described, is very important. That's a major component of our department's mission, is educating the public on how to be fire safe. Fire investigations is also a large part of fire prevention. We always try to determine what caused the fire. If we can figure out what the cause of the fire was, we can take steps to deal with whatever that situation is. And it ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's vehicles that are starting them. Then lately it's been a lot of power line problems as the aging infrastructure of our power infrastructure has been very vulnerable to some of our wind events. And then code enforcement. So one huge job that fire prevention does is we enforce codes. Road widths, water supplies, things like that help make properties safer. We often people sort of grudgingly accept those codes because they can be a little more challenging when you're trying to get a project developed. But in the end, most people realize that sprinkler systems and alarm systems and proper fire hydrants spaced in the right places and the right amount of water makes a big difference for our community. And then we can look at fire suppression. That's the part of the job that all of us young firefighters came in to be firefighters and pull hose and spray water on fire, and that was near and dear to our heart. I miss the fire suppression part of the job. I'm stuck in the office quite a bit. But fire suppression is a huge part of the solution. It really is. The vast majority of our fires are human caused. And so while, as the chief alluded to, prescribed fire is part of our proactive strategy, in some of our communities, we have too much fire. And so we need to limit some of those human-caused fires. And typically, human-caused fires happen at the worst possible time, when the weather is the most severe, resulting in a severe fire. And so having adequate fire suppression is very important. It's a combination of adequate resources and early detection of our fires. Infrastructure hardening, the third item there, that really goes to how well we build our community. Buildings, transportation networks, bridges, you name it. Everything that's built by us, if it's resistant to fire and if it can handle being exposed to wildfire, it greatly reduces the downstream negative effects to our community. So if you have a fire like, let's take the most extreme example of all, which was the campfire that burned down the town of Paradise, the downstream consequences of that are going to last for a generation. It's going to take it literally probably 20 years to truly rebuild that town back to where it was. They will be feeling the repercussions of that for a generation. So infrastructure hardening is very important. And then fuels management, okay? Fuels management, it's one of the proactive things we can do when we look at that fire triangle. So we can't do much about the weather, except apparently we're making it worse. We really can't do anything about the topography. The mountains are the mountains. But we can take some proactive measures with the fuel beds. And that's the challenge, again, as the chief alluded to, is taking those proactive measures, but doing it in a responsible way. All right, next slide. So real quick, so most wildland urban interface disasters happen because of embers. Embers are truly the white elephant in the room when it comes to structure loss. Why so many structures are lost on some fires is because of embers. It's like a snowstorm of burning embers that precedes your fire. And anything that's flammable is vulnerable to these embers that fall out sometimes a mile ahead of the main fire front. And so that's really the key, is whatever steps we take have to deal to some extent with this problem of these embers. Next slide. And so here's an example of ways you can deal with that, infrastructure hardening. So we look at these two houses, and these are both located up on the top of San Marcos Pass. And the house on the left is an example of a house that has been hardened. So they have covered it in stucco. It's got a tile roof. It has great defensible space. It has very little openings that embers can get into and create a little incipient fire. The house on the right is an all-wood house. It does have a composition roof, but other than that, it is basically exposed to fire on every single wall, has open decks, and they have pretty poor vegetation management. Now, in defense of that homeowner, that house, no one is living in it, and it was on the market, so I think he was just getting ready to sell it and walk away. But these houses are literally across the street from each other. So
the house is next to us, and it's very much changed.
yes, I bet you it has, because I remember when I looked at it, I went, gosh, I hope somebody buys this and does what needs to be done. But this was a great example. I literally took one picture and then I turned and I took the other. So, okay, next slide. Defensible space. Here's an example of two different types of defensible space. So on the left side, you see a house that actually was burned around it. There was a fire that happened. And that's like your classic defensible space that you see in every pamphlet out there. They've done basically landscaping around their house that is very fire resistant, and it's irrigated and isn't going to burn. And then they've modified the vegetation outside that by reducing the flammable fuel. And of course, they survived that fire. The picture on the right is an example of what we call community defensible space. And this is Mission Canyon, where we have really, really small lots and dense houses that go right up to the National Forest. And then it just turns into chaparral. And in 2009, that exact area was hit by the Hasacita fire, and it burned down 80 of the homes, and 6 different firefighting engine companies were entrapped. And 2 firefighters had significant burn injuries as a result of that fire in that exact area that you're looking at. And so what you see now is that lighter shading that's along that foothill zone is where we went in and did a fuels management project. We thinned out the chaparral. We didn't remove it. As you can see, there's still a lot of vegetation along there. It's just thinner than the vegetation that's above it. And we used our hand crew. We tried to minimize soil disturbance and created a buffer for that community. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then prescribed fire. So this is a tool that actually we've used quite a bit over the generations in Santa Barbara County. There was a very active burning program with the Range Improvement Association here in the valley. So many of the ranchers would use fire to increase the range on their ranches. And then we've used it along with the Forest Service to reduce the age class of some of the chaparral. When you burn chaparral, as we all know, it's fire adapted and it grows back. And it has a very defined window where when it's too young, it's not going to burn. It's very highly resistant to fire when it's a very young plant. And when it's really old, say 50-year-old chaparral, it's explosively flammable. But there's that really good sweet spot where it's about 15 to 30 years old, and It'll be a vibrant plant community full of wildlife, full of diversity. And as you get through that span of time, it starts to become more and more decadent with dead fuel, and that fire flammability just builds up. And so really that's the role of prescribed fire, is to take that fuel bed and bring it back to a younger class of vegetation. Okay, next slide. And then we're getting close to the end here. Prescribed herbivory and agriculture. These are things that for us as an agency, we look at our agricultural community and how much it does to protect our communities. It's really amazing, particularly along the Santa Barbara South Coast. The orchard belts, the ranches around the valley where there's cattle grazing, it really is amazing how much that limits the spread of large fires into our communities. And keep going. And then strategic fuel breaks, another tool that we use. Probably this is used less than the other concepts that I described. So fuel breaks have their place. They're hard to maintain. They don't always work. So these are kind of just in some specialized areas. And next slide. And you can just zip through. And this is an example of some of the challenges we face. Homes built like this up in the mountains, surrounded by dense vegetation, very difficult for our firefighters to protect. And one more. Nice shot of the Zaka fire. And one more slide. So I'll close with the vision of the California Strategic Fire Plan. And this really sums it up, is that we have a natural environment that is more fire resilient, buildings and infrastructure that are more resistant to fire, and a society that is aware and responsive to the benefits and threats of wildland fire. So we're educated, we understand that fire has a role, and that we have to accept it and learn to live with it and do what we can to adapt to it. And this is all achieved through partnerships. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Hazard and Chief Hartwig. I will allow 2 questions if you have a burning question, and then pun intended, and then we'll move it on to Bill Bulow.
Until recently, there was a chipping program. So if we had extra stuff on our property, we could call in the fire department and they would come and chip. So we didn't have to have any burning. And we don't like a lot of burning in the valley because it creates air pollution. What's happened to the chipping program?
That's a great question. So the chipping program that we instituted in the valley, it did have some benefits. It's very inefficient for our hand crew. Typically, when we do chipping events, I'll give you an example of an active chipping event that we do every year, is in Mission Canyon. And so this is basically a 3-day chipping event. Everybody in a concentrated community brings all their material to the street, and our hand crew goes in over a course of 3 days. And it's a lot of work, and it's all hands on deck. The program that was happening in the San Ynez Valley was basically one person would call and say, hey, can you come chip my stuff? And we would come do it, and it would be one pile, and here's our whole 20-person hand crew that just took half the day to go drive there and chip that one pile. So we're reevaluating it. I mean, people that have permits right now can elect to do it. So if you have a burn permit, it's based on the burn permit. So if you pay your $50, you get your burn permit. If you want to do the chipping program, you can call us and we'll send someone out. We're evaluating whether we continue it. My preference would be to do more chipping events where we say, okay, for this portion of San Ynez or Los Olivos or some area, we're going to do it in a concentrated area, and people just bring their stuff, drop it on the side of the road, and we come and do it, because it's more efficient. Our hand crew, I will tell you that they're in high demand, and they're working projects all over the place. So it was just we were reevaluating the efficiency of that. We did make some changes to the burn program, though. You can't burn until 10 o'clock and a few things like that, and so I think it has made a difference with the air quality.
Okay. So thank you, Rob and Mark again. They also talked about some interesting synergies in terms of agriculture, and we'll get into that later on. But also how our landscape interacts and is affected by the availability of water. And so that brings us to Bill Bulow, who is the groundwater program manager for the Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District. He's responsible for the district's groundwater reporting and well registration program. He's the point of contact and administrator for 3 groundwater sustainability agencies, Sounds like a highly coveted job there. And in the Santa Ynez River Valley Groundwater Basin. He's coordinating the preparation of 3 groundwater sustainability master plans in compliance with the California Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Garrett. Good evening. My name is Bill Bulow, and as he mentioned, I'm the Groundwater Program Manager at the Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District. And I'd like to thank WeWatch and the Citizens Planning Association for having me here tonight to talk about the water issues related to climate change. And the topic, how does climate change threaten the Santa Ynez Valley? Tonight, I plan to talk to you about how our water resources and how our local agencies are coming together with the public to address this. The district. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the district. The district was formed in 1939 to protect water rights for downstream users in the Santa Ynez and Lompoc valleys, especially in the lower areas of the valley. This was in response to 3 dams being built up in the upper reaches of the Santa Ynez, including the Gibraltar Dam in 1920, the Juncal, which formed Gibraltar Lake, and then the Juncal Dam, which formed Jameson Lake in 1930, and then Bradbury Dam, which formed Cachuma Lake in 1953. Associated with those 3 reservoirs were 3 tunnels, the Dalton, Mission, and Tecolote Tunnel, which deliver water from the upper Santa Ynez Basin to the south coast. Since its inception, the district has been involved with water resource management and planning, and has been involved with tracking water rights releases on a yearly basis or every other year from Cachuma Reservoir to benefit the downstream users. And the district is also involved with, has had a well registration and groundwater pump charge program since the late 70s. And currently, we are involved with a new groundwater extraction law from the state of California called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or we call it SGMA. We're a small district. We only have 3 employees and a few part-time contractors, but we are here to serve you and we work for you. So I'd like to talk a little bit before we move to the next slide about the water resources that are in the valley. Surface water is one of them, and I mentioned a little bit about the surface water bodies. Actually, only a very little bit of that surface water from the reservoirs actually gets used in the Santa Ynez Valley. Some of it is allocated from Cachuma and gets distributed by a municipal water purveyor. Most of you know its name's ID1. And that is a surface water source that we have in this area. But most of the surface water, like I said, gets diverted to the south coast. The other sources of water that we have, and the largest one, are the groundwater basins, which are these colored areas. It doesn't really show very well with this projector, but they are all different colors. Within the district boundaries, and the district is this dotted line right here, and it's 2 discontiguous pieces, and we've got roughly 180,000 acres of land within the district. And within those boundaries, there's roughly on an annual basis about 50,000 acre feet of water that are produced within the district. And in case you didn't know, an acre foot is 325,000 gallons, thereabouts. Some additional water is produced outside the district boundaries, and that's roughly 5,000 to 10,000 acre feet, approximately. And the main aquifers are Pliocene alluvial deposits, and the formations that we know them locally are the Orchid, Paso Robles, and Carriega formations. We also have gravel alluvium along the river, and people are extracting water from that gravel. That's another source of water that's part of the 50,000 acre feet that I mentioned. The main uses of groundwater within our basin are agriculture, municipal, industrial, and then special. Agriculture represents about 70% of the groundwater use, the municipal and industrial about 25%, And then special water, which is cemeteries and parks and schools, that's the remaining less than 5%. The other source of water, aside from surface water and groundwater, is imported water. And that comes through the state water program. And roughly 8,000 acre feet of water are imported into the basin on an annual basis. About 2,500 acre feet go to the communities in the eastern end of the basin, Buellton, Solvang, and San Ynez. The other 5,500 acre feet is imported for use in Vandenberg Air Force Base. So that's a little bit about the setting. Next slide, please, Yusel. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the climate and how we get water through precipitation and then subsequently through infiltration. The top part of this screen of this chart here is a precipitation chart. And the longer the bar, the more precipitation, and the shorter the bar, the smaller amount of precipitation. And then there's a black line that goes across the middle, and that's sort of the mean. So this is from Buellton Fire Station, and it is from let's see if I can read that, 1996 through 2010. The average precipitation was around 17.2 inches of rain. But you can see that it varies quite a bit. I mean, we have a climate that has hot, dry summers. You know, we don't get any rain in the summertime, and then cool winters that are occasionally wet, unlike this year. So we do have periodic droughts, and it's very dynamic. So if you take this precipitation and then you look at the departure from normal, so if departure from that 17 average, if you have years where the departure is accumulating, you get a slope that goes down. You get more decrease in departure from the normal. And that indicates a dry period. And then when the slope goes the other way and you have positive departures from normal, you get a wet period. So these orange areas represent dry, the blue represents a wet, dry, wet, dry. So that's kind of how our climate around here works. And I think everybody in this room knows that pretty well. So the reason I'm talking about this is going to be very evident soon. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the county of Santa Barbara has put together an integrated regional management plan for water. And this is right out of their plan. And they talk about some of the impacts that we should expect to see here in the Santa Barbara area as we move into the middle part of the 21st century. The top line says that we should prepare for temperatures that increase in both winter and summer by anywhere from 4 to 5 or 5 to 6 degrees by the middle of the century. We should expect some decreases in average annual rainfall. So remember I mentioned in the previous slide that Buellton had a 17-year running average. So it just says that the average may decrease in this range over the next few decades. And not only that, the precipitation will decrease, but there'll be an increase in the variability. So we'll get more intense storms with longer, drier periods. And these are all connected to something that, as a water person, we're very concerned about, is the ability for the water to infiltrate and to recharge our groundwater resources. As I mentioned earlier, we're very dependent on groundwater here, and we need those long, wet winters, even if they are periodic, to recharge our groundwater resources. You'll hear in the news that somebody will declare that the drought is over, the reservoirs are full, and happy days are here again. But meanwhile, over at the water well, the geologists are freaking out because the water has not yet come back even after a nice wet winter. Those groundwater basins take a long time to recharge after a drought. So that's something that when we're looking at climate change that we have to take into consideration. Even though there may be more water vapor in the air as a result of climate change, and even though we may be raining outside, that doesn't mean that our groundwater basins are going to be recharging. And that's something that we really need, is those long period wet times when the water just soaks into the ground. It wets our watershed so that vegetation up in the upper reaches of the watershed can suck in the water and then release it throughout the spring. And that's the ideal condition. The the management plan talks about sea level rise. That's not something that's really a concern to this area. It's certainly something that we are going to be watching in the western area of the basin down near Lompoc. There are expectations for increases of a foot or so by the middle of the century. In terms of state supplies, the county's telling us that we should expect that state water project deliveries would decrease anywhere from 7 to 10% by mid-century and 20 to 25% by the end of the century. And this is simply due to the loss of snowpack. If the climate warms such that the snowpack forms weeks later and melts weeks earlier, and is much smaller in its mass, then we won't have that emergency supply. We won't have that supply that melts throughout the summer, fills our reservoirs, and then gets piped down to Santa Barbara County. We just won't have as much water available through that source. So that's something that we need to take into consideration. And then, of course, what our colleagues from the fire department mentioned is wildfire. And really those impacts to the Santa Ynez, the upper reaches of the Santa Ynez watershed. Most of the watershed around Cachuma Lake burned within the last 10 years. And we're seeing a lot of the negative effects from that through increased flash floods. We're seeing debris flows. We're seeing siltation. We're seeing water quality issues. These are things that are happening right now. And these are things that we're going to have to deal with in the future. If we silt up Cachuma Reservoir, which is currently at 193,000 acre feet, if we lose some capacity in that reservoir, we're not going to be able to get it back. You can't just bring a bulldozer in there and remove it easily. It's a huge effort. There's a lot of material to move. So we have to be concerned about the loss and deal with the loss of capacity in our reservoirs. And then, of course, we're dealing with increased floods. So these are the things that we need to be concerned about as in terms of the water world. Next slide. So what are we going to do about it, and how are we planning for it? Well, through the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which was one of the first groundwater regulations in the state of California. California had regulations for everything, but it didn't have regulations for groundwater. So in 2015, the act was put in place, and it gives local control for water management. And so all of the water agencies in the basin have gotten together, and we formed 3 groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, and those were formed in 2017. And we're about 2 years into a 4-year project to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan that needs to be submitted to the state no later than January of 2022. And the GSPs will address 6 undesirable results from groundwater pumping, including declining water levels, declining water quality, negative impacts to surface water, loss of groundwater storage, subsidence, and saltwater intrusion. Of course, all of these things can be exacerbated by the effects of climate change. Next slide. The good news is that SGMA requires addressing climate change within its plan. So we do have consultants, and some of which are in the room tonight, working with us to look at the available data that we have, and they're putting together models of the basin, both a description of the basin, what the basin looks like, the basin being the Santa Ynez Basin. You can think of it as a giant hot tub that's empty. And you know that hot tubs have seats and it has contours. And so this model sort of describes what that looks like. And then what they do is they export the data from that model into a math model, which describes how the water then flows through the basin. And SGMA gives us some guidance and best management practices on how to include climate change in our models. They also help us with water budgeting, and water budgeting is a term that we use to describe all the inflows and all the outflows to our basin through time. And then it also gives us some guidance on climate change. Next slide. Sorry, I'm wrapping it up. Last slide. So one way you can help us out is if you want to find out more about SGMA, is you can come to one of our 3 groundwater sustainability meetings. They happen quarterly, February, May, August, and November. So there's lots of time for you to, and lots of opportunities for you to come by and join a meeting. And I would encourage you to find out more information is to go to our website, and we have a website for the 3 GSAs, and you can learn more about climate change and learn more about what we're doing with the groundwater sustainability plans at www.santaynezwater.org. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Bill. Does anyone have a hot question for Bill while he's up here? We'll take one over here. Would you mind coming?
Curious if desalinization comes into the plan at all, and if so, how?
We don't have any desalinization plants in the basin, and it wouldn't be very cost effective for us to.
But Santa Barbara, right?
Right, but that's not within the Santa Ynez Basin. That's outside the basin. So the other side of the hill.
So we don't get any benefit from that? No.
No, fortunately. Yes. You want the microphone?
Yeah, how do you balance interests of urban areas versus the ag areas in the Senate now, in the SGMA plan for the county? I mean, for this area.
That's a great question. We have to consider both. We have to look at the interest of the municipal users as well as the agricultural users. We have to look at all, SGMA requires that we look at all of the uses and users of groundwater in our basin. So everything from the tribe to other federal agencies that are using water, to environmental ecosystems, different types of farming. We have to make sure we have representation of everybody, and then you look at the term ag, it's very broad. I mean, we have cattle ranchers, we have vineyards, we have cannabis, we have row croppers, we have all kinds of different types of ag. So we have to make sure that we are very inclusive. We have to make sure everybody's under the tent when we're doing the plan.
You did not mention recycling or a sewer treatment plant that can recycle, which Solvang is dealing with, but not well. So.
No, you're absolutely right. I apologize for I did not include that as a source of water. It is something that we should be considering, and it is something that I think is on the table. I just don't really know much about it at this point. It's not something that is playing into what I think is the overall supplies of the basin. But I think it's something that we can look at in the future if our communities are going to support it.
One last one.
During the most recent intense period of drought, we saw that the 7-year ideal capacity that Cachuma was supposed to have for the South Coast users, and that they established their withdrawals from the lake on, was not working. And there was discussion about changing that 7-year model to make it more realistic in terms of what water could be expected. The reason why I asked that is because if there's no water in the lake, you can't release downstream to provide water to the downstream and valley users that your agency was originally provided for. So what is your agency doing to make sure that those South Coast users start to reevaluate how much they can safely pull from Cachuma?
That's a really good question, and thank you for asking it. There's a lot of complex work that goes into the resources of Cachuma. There's a yield of the project, and that gets for the South Coast. So the whole 190, even if the lake was full, that's not all water destined for the South Coast. The water for downstream, think of it as a layer cake. There's different layers of water. There's a layer for there's a layer for the South Coast that goes downstream, that goes through the pipes down across the mountain. There's a layer for evaporation. There's a layer for fish, and there's another layer for downstream users. So and it is kind of our job to keep track of our layer of water and all the other layers and coordinate with those in the South Coast to ensure that releases that we do not impact them, and usage that they do does not impact us. So it's the reason why we go to work every day, and that's why we're there, and it keeps the three of us very, very busy every day.
Thank you again, Bill. So we're going to shift over towards more of the agricultural side of the region and the climate challenges and solutions. And we have Anna Olson here, who's the executive director of the Cachuma Resource Conservation District. She has lots of degrees from lots of fancy places. She has 12 years of experience in agriculture and natural resource project management in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Please help me welcome Anna.
All right, thank you, everybody. So I am the executive director of the Cachuma Resource Conservation District. Can you move forward a slide? So as a primer for what a resource conservation district is and what the Cachuma Resource Conservation District is, I am going to give you a little snapshot. So resource conservation districts started in the Dust Bowl. They were called soil conservation districts. They were formed with the Soil Conservation Service back in the 30s as a result of the Dust Bowl to address resource concerns, primarily water and soil at that point in time. They are all throughout the United States. There are actually, they're federally mandated, so every state has some sort of conservation district, soil water conservation district, resource conservation district, or conservation district. They all go by different names, but they all do the same thing. So in 1944 was when the first Resource Conservation District or Soil Conservation District was formed in Santa Barbara County. There were 4. They were combined to create the Cachuma Resource Conservation District. We do cover all of Santa Barbara County, as well as a very small portion of Kern and San Luis Obispo counties, as well as the Channel Islands. So we are not the lake. So I will not be able to address any lake-related questions. So I'm just going to put that out there first. But we do promote land ethics that result in long-term use of natural resources while protecting and enhancing our unique natural habitats that are here in the county. Go ahead and move forward. So agriculture is still, we're not fully, we know, let me say this, we know some climate threats that are going to impact agriculture. In Santa Barbara County, we don't know what those specifically are. There have not been any studies specifically for Santa Barbara County. So this is going to just be a broad overview of what some of those threats are. And then I'm going to spend some of my time talking about what we can do to help promote and protect agriculture in the changing climate in the future. So as it was previously mentioned, we're going to have unpredictable weather patterns. We're already seeing that. We have drought, we have flooding, we have debris flows. The water availability is going to be up in the air. We don't know what Sigma is going to bring to the agricultural users. We've seen in some counties in the Central Valley and in Southern California, they are eliminating ag. I mean, they are buying out all of the ag, and there's no more agricultural production in some of those areas. That is not something that we are looking to do in Santa Barbara County from everyone that I've talked to. But we just don't know what our groundwater or surface water availability is going to be for ag moving forward. No, please go back. Thank you. There's going to be hotter, drier days. There's going to be fewer chill hours. So if you don't know what that means, some fruit and some vegetables take a certain number of hours of chill at night for a certain number of days in order for that fruit or that vegetable to set. And so without that, we will have maybe potentially a decrease in production. I know some areas in Ventura County, they have all of their strawberries on movable plates that they put into a cooler at night and then take out during the day, just so that they can get their hours of cooling so that they can get their strawberries produced. Wildfire also impacts agriculture. It can, of course, impact the infrastructure or the livestock or, any fruit, vegetables. The avocados, I know down in Ventura County, there was definitely a lot of avocado loss due to the Thomas Fire. And so what is all of the unpredictable, the temperature, the wildfire, what does that mean? So there's shifting pest disease and invasive plant populations that are moving in relation to the temperature, to the precipitation. So they're moving into our county, they're moving out of our county into other counties. And so that can lead to decreased production. It can lead to more intense outbreaks of pests in our forested areas. Less land can be in production. If there's less water, there's not going to be as much land that we're able to produce agricultural products on. There can be a decreased quality as well due to the higher temperatures. And then, of course, you need to consider your worker safety and your livestock health. If you have hot, dry days and it's very, very hot out and you've got your agricultural workers out there, that's something to consider as well, and that can lead to a decrease in production as well. Okay. So what are some solutions? So natural and working lands can act as a solution to climate change. We can see that we have seen that it can help with carbon sequestration. It can increase, by increasing soil health, we can also increase water holding capacity. And we can also use agricultural operations as groundwater recharge and infiltration. We want to protect our agricultural lands because, as it was mentioned, it can act as a buffer to urban populations for wildfire. And it can help increase biodiversity and habitat for pollinators and other wildlife species. As we are decreasing our water availability through long-term droughts, we do need to increase our irrigation efficiency and nutrient management. So there are services like what the Resource Conservation does that can help with increasing your water efficiency and testing your systems to see where there can be improvements. And then another option that I won't get into, but is the opportunity for on-farm renewable energy. There is some going on in the Lompoc area, potentially. And so weighing that with other land uses. Okay. So the point of this slide is not to read all of the numbers. The point of this slide is to help show that agriculture can help act as a solution to mitigate climate impacts. So we assist with what we call carbon farm planning. So that is looking at all the opportunities on an operation to see where there's potential to sequester carbon. So there are very many. These are just a small handful. And this is an example on a ranch that is here in the San Ynez Valley. It is a large ranch, but this can be done on any size acreage. So you can see here, there's all these practices that are listed on the practice row. And then there's all these opportunities to sequester carbon. And this number at the bottom that says the 6,800 or 6,081 to 7,000. If you just took that number, an annual potential carbon sequestration for 1 year, that would equate to about 4,600 cars off the road for 1 year, or the powering about 2,500 homes with energy for 1 year. So just by implementing these practices, you can offset car usage, energy usage, just because of this sequestration potential. And so I talked about water holding capacity. So each percent of soil organic matter increase in let me get my notes so I get my numbers correct. So each 1% increase in soil organic matter can result in about 1 acre inch of water holding capacity, which is about 27,000 gallons of water. So just with a 1% increase. So here showing that using these carbon farming practices or carbon sequestration practices, you can not only sequester carbon, but increase your soil organic matter by doing that, which increases your water holding capacity. So what is cut off, I think, at the end, at the bottom, is that the total number is about 917 acre feet over a 20-year period, which equates to just under 300 million gallons of water, potentially to be able to be held within that growth layer of where you're sequestering the carbon. So we did a study several years ago about the potential to offset the agricultural emissions within Santa Barbara County. We just took one of the potential implementation practices, which would be compost applied to rangeland, and we looked at all of the different suitable acres within Santa Barbara County to see if we were to spread a 1/4 inch of compost. And we won't, this is a whole nother story, so if you want to talk about this, we can talk about this. But if you want, for the reason for a 1/4 inch of compost over private, federal, state, and other working lands in Santa Barbara County, the total acreage would be just under 270,000 acres. If you want to move forward. So here is a little more detail. So if we took 42,000 of those acres and applied a one-time application of 1/4 inch of compost on those 42,000 acres, we would be able to hit the offset emission reduction goal of the current ECAP for Santa Barbara County for their agricultural sector. So that's just one potential implementation practice. That isn't even the one that sequesters the most carbon. Obviously, woody plantings such as trees, hedgerows, shelter belts can sequester much more carbon. But this was just one practice that we did a focus study on to be able to see if we were able to offset all the Santa Barbara County agricultural emissions, and we would be able to do that on agricultural lands in Santa Barbara County. So we do have, directly related, we do have a workshop on next Wednesday for the Healthy Soils Program. So the Healthy Soils Program is a California Department of Food and Ag program that provides funding and incentives for people to implement carbon beneficial practices. So these healthy soils practices, there is a whole big list that we can get into. I would love to chat with you about, but we have an upcoming workshop in San Ynez at the Community Services District on March 11th at 9 a.m. So, and that's all.
Thank you very much, Anna. Do we have a question to follow up?
We're aware of the soil sequestration, the carbon sequestration, whatever it is, on the Chamberlain Ranch. We had a very informative program there. But what about planting trees? I mean, I'm more and more aware of how trees are really essential to our survival in the future. And is there an opportunity here in the San Ynez Valley to do that?
There absolutely is. All throughout the county there is. We've got some pilot projects going on kind of on this side of the Gaviota Coast with some tree plantings. And we are looking to see how efficiently we can do that and economically, because it's very expensive to grow trees, especially when we're in a drought and we have to continue to water them. So those were oaks that we're doing. I believe we're doing some potentially on the Chamberlain Ranch as well, some tree plantings. And then other like shelter belts, which is just another term for tree plantings. We're doing some of those and talking with some vineyards about maybe adding some. It's a very valuable tool.
Great. Thank you, Anna. All right, Jeff, you've been so patient. We're on to our last speaker, who is Jeff Newton, who founded as the president CEO of the Coastal Vineyard Care Associates. Been growing grapes in Santa Barbara County since 1983, and he studied viticulture at UC Davis. Former board member of the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, and also current member of the Citizens Advisory Group for the San Ynez Valley Central Management Area Groundwater Sustainability Plan. I like this one the best in that in 2012, Jeff was named the top 100 most influential people in the U.S. wine industry by Into Wine. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Garrett. Nice to be here today. I grow wine grapes in San Ynez. I've done it since 1983. And I'm going to talk about climate change impacts on wine grapes here and kind of around the world. So in the early 1990s, I read an article by the famous viticulturalist
Richard Smart, suggesting that climate change could be a game changer for the vineyard industry. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is the least of my worries. And now climate change is one of the worst of our problems. So Greg Jones, who's a professor of wine education and climatology at Linfield College in Oregon, recently said that in the Western United States, over the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to see 1 to 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit increase in temperatures. So we know that the temperatures are increasing, but for us, really, what's happening is the weather events are becoming much more radical, so much more extreme. So we see more drought, more heat spikes. There's more frost, more hail, more forest fires, and all of these things affect our wine grapes adversely. For instance, the drought reduces our yields. The heat spikes, sunburns our fruit, shrivels our fruit, reduces our quality. The frosts reduce our yield. Hail, which we don't have a lot of in San Ynez, but there are areas in the world where it's pretty devastating. Reducing yields significantly. And then forest fires. So forest fires are something we see in California in the vineyard areas, particularly in the North Coast, where the smoke from the forest fires during the ripening period taints the wine. So it ruins the wine, and so basically it needs to be destroyed. Let me do a little tour of world viticulture so you kind of get an idea about what's going on around the world. In the summer of 2017, I visited the wine areas of northern Italy, Barolo Barbaresco, and then also the Tuscany areas. And they were experiencing a super dry summer at the time. The appellation regulations don't allow irrigation generally during the spring and summertime. It rains there, so they don't typically need to irrigate. But the vines were suffering really badly from drought stress, and the growers were struggling, trying to figure out what to do. Essentially, they had to drop most of their crop on the ground to allow the remaining crop to ripen. In Bordeaux, the appellation laws recently were changed to allow experimentation with warmer season varieties. And this is a huge change in an appellation that's very, very traditional and is focused on Cabernet Sauvignon. So relaxing those laws to allow other varieties is, for Bordeaux is a huge deal. In southern England, they're now producing wine grapes for sparkling wine. It turns out, southern England used to not be able to, it was too cold to grow wine grapes. So we're also seeing French champagne houses buying property in England. So they're going to be expanding their operations into England, into this area that 20 years ago couldn't grow a grape. In the Napa Valley, the heat spikes, the sunburn and shrivel and the fruit is causing huge problems. They also up in Napa are looking into alternative varieties that will withstand warmer temperatures. They are also looking into rootstocks that are more drought resistant. So there are stocks that can help that way. Moving a little closer to home here in Paso Robles. Paso Robles suffers from heat spikes as well. So same situation, a lot of sunburn, a lot of shrivel to the fruit. And one of the things that they're doing there, which has been quite successful, is using shade cloth to protect the fruit during the ripening process. In the San Ynez Valley, we're seeing more spring frosts than we've ever seen before. When it freezes in the early springtime and kills the young shoots, it also kills the fruit that's on those young shoots. So this frost thing is becoming more of an issue for us. In Happy Canyon, which is one of our warmer areas for wine grapes in the San Ynez Valley, again, these heat spikes are really causing trouble with a sunburn and shrivel. What sunburn does, most of the flavor and aroma in a wine grape is in the skin, and if you sunburn that skin, you impact those aromas and flavors. So there's a degradation in quality for sure there. So what are we doing now in Santa Barbara County to deal with these climate changes? Many things. I've talked about a few of them already, but in our warm areas in Happy Canyon, as we're planting new vineyards, we orient the rows more south, southwest, northeast to protect the grapes from the western side. Generally is warmer. So in angling the vines that way, we can reduce the heat impact on the vines. We're also going to tea trellises, trying to fluff up the canopies, grow a few more leaves so that the fruit is protected. That's been a big technique. Every vineyard we plant in Happy Canyon now has these tea trellises. Also, we're using drought-resistant rootstock. The 1103 is a great stock for that, so we're using a lot of that now when, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't use that stock at all. And then we are also changing to varieties that are more adaptable to these warmer conditions that we're seeing. In Santa Rita Hills, which is our coolest area for wine grapes, we have a lot of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That's the area between Buellton and Lompoc. As it gets warmer, we're pushing kind of west of Santa Rita Hills towards the town of Lompoc. So we're planting into areas that are cooler. So as it gets warmer, we're planting into those cooler areas. Outside of Santa Barbara County, where hail's a big issue, hail's very damaging in Burgundy. You probably read about that the last few years. It's a terrible problem there. It's a big problem in Barolo and Barbaresco in northern Italy, and a terrible problem in Argentina. And in those areas now they are installing hail nets. So they're nets that they look like teepees. They go over the top of the grapevine to protect against the hail. When hail hits a grapevine, it shreds the leaves and completely pocks and destroys the fruit. So it's the most devastating thing. I remember being in Burgundy 5 or 6 years ago, a week after a terrible hailstorm, and you could see the growers how devastated they were. Just a horrible situation there. Also, in the world where you have higher elevations, where you have the potential of planting at higher elevations where it's cooler, we're doing that a lot. So you see Argentina, for instance, moving into the Uco Valley, where it's cooler than the areas closer to Mendoza. So, and then finally, just a couple of things about carbon sequestration. So, there's a lot of talk about no-till farming, and there's quite a bit done around the United States, and more all the time. What that's all about is not cultivating the ground, and that is a form of carbon sequestration for sure. And so we do that to a certain extent. Typically, we're planting cover crops during the winter time, or the fall rather. They grow in the winter. And then typically we would disc one row and leave the other row with grass. So where there's sequestration to a certain extent. So for us also, cultivation is a little bit about preserving moisture. So in very, very drouthy years, like year before, not last year so much, but the years before, we would disc every row just to preserve moisture. So that for us, there's that kind of trade-off, sequestration against moisture preservation. Any questions?
Yeah, so are we going to start growing grapes on Figueroa Mountain?
Well, there's a couple of things about growing grapes. You have to be able to drive the tractor. Yeah, so some areas of Figueroa Mountain, higher up, yeah. So we're always looking for areas that are higher up. I'm working on some projects in Mexico and Baja right now, and so we're looking, because it's a southern latitude, we're looking for areas that are at higher elevations to give us cooler conditions, particularly frost conditions that give us the chill hours we need.
I have relatives back in Iowa, and they've stopped plowing years ago. Everything is chisel planting, and there's just not even cultivating. I was wondering if that approach has been tried here.
it's a terrific approach, and it definitely works in those areas. So, it also rains in those areas during the summertime, so they have that benefit. But where we see, there are vineyards in Santa Barbara County. If you drive around and look, sometimes you'll see complete cultivation, other times complete grass, but most of the time you'll see one row disked and the next not. And so I'm always amazed at how much less vigor there is in vineyards that are grassed completely, 100%. So there's clearly competition going on. But where it rains in the summertime, basically no-till agriculture is quite successful in the Midwest.
My question was about colder climates. Are people going to use hoop houses?
Yeah, for water conservation.
Are people
also.
going to use hoop houses in colder climates to try to make greenhouse sort of effect?
For wine grapes?
Yeah, I can't imagine, but I read that.
Yeah, so typically you would not see wine grapes inside any kind of a greenhouse. I've recently heard about actually growers in northern Mexico veggie growers in northern Mexico that want to do table grapes inside greenhouses. That's the first I've ever heard of that. I've never seen it.
Are you seeing earlier bud break this year because of?
We're seeing generally earlier bud break the last like 7 and 8 years. So it really is when you live outside all day every day, you notice changes, and so as an agriculturalist, there's definitely something going on out there. So yeah, we do see earlier bud break and earlier harvest. Lansing.
I know water means money, so you're not going to irrigate more than you need to, but are you having to just be much, much more flexible in terms of your irrigation schedules, and what practices can you adopt that can conserve water as you try and address climate change?
Yeah. Super question. So one of the great things about grapevines, they're native to the Middle East, to Persia, and where the soils are very poor and where there's not a lot of water. So grapes in general don't need lots of water. Also, the grapes that we grow in Santa Barbara County, we're growing these for ultra quality bottles of wine, and typically if we want to drive the quality level up, we do that by restraining irrigation. And so we have, we're using a lot of different techniques to help us determine when to irrigate and how much to irrigate, and using pressure bombs are quite useful for us, and evapotranspiration. We have probably 20 different weather stations in the San Ynez Valley, and we take that data and crunch it into evapotranspiration. And so, on many of our ranches, we're at between 15 and 20% of ET, which is like a tiny amount. So we're doing the best we can to reduce the amount of water. And as I say, in general, grapes don't need much anyway. One of the questions that typically comes up is, what about dry farming? And so there are many places in the world that dry farm. So if you go to Burgundy, Bordeaux, they dry farm. The appellations don't allow irrigation, again because it rains during the wintertime. So there have been studies done at several universities that have looked at this for around the vineyard business, and it turns out more or less you need about 25 inches of rain and 3 feet of soil to enable dry farming for wine grapes. So there are many places in California where you get 25 inches for sure, in Sonoma County, Napa gets 25 inches. The west side of Paso Robles gets 25 inches. So those folks can dry farm. But when we have 12 inches, it's rough. So there are areas in California or in the San Ynez Valley where we can dry farm. We've got there's underground water sources, rootstocks that are particularly resistant to drought, that are very useful. Lansing, follow up. Super. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to first thank everyone on the panel who came out tonight and gave a lot of great information, a lot of great conversation. So please, one more time for our panelists. And I believe we will be, for anyone who's interested, you will probably be able to access the slides, and there's going to be a recording thereafter. So if there's something that you missed or something that you want to follow up with, you'll be able to have access to that. I really want to thank the Citizens Planning Association for putting this event on, and We Watch for also supporting the event. And more importantly, I want to thank you all for coming out, taking the time out of your nights and days to be here to talk about some pretty depressing stuff. But you know, the reason why we all work in this field is because we believe we can make a difference. And the reason why you're all here in this room is because you believe that there is a difference that we collectively can make. So please hold on to that hope. And please continue to spread the word around the issues as well as the solutions, and continue to stay engaged, because I think that's really the most important part, is that we continue to have informed dialogue and move forward into making the hard decisions that we will have to make in the future, because we know nothing is going to be the same as it once was. So with that, I'll say good night, and thank you again for coming.